It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sylvain Perret, who is a senior researcher at CIRAD, the French Agricultural Research Center for International Development. He is also a visiting associate professor at the Asian Institute of Technology based in Thailand. Dr. Perret specializes in the institutional and government aspects of water management. And given that water-related disasters form major bulk of the disasters worldwide, we have invited Dr. Perret here to share his insights on the softer aspects of disaster risk reduction and management, or DRRM. Welcome, Dr. Perret.
Thanks for having me here.
Now, to start with, proper governance is required for sound natural resource management and DRRM. Could you briefly mention the importance of governance in this context?
Yeah, governance is indeed very important. We have some sessions on technology during this webinar, but I think that we could define governance as the soft technology. It's all the human dimensions. As we all know, decisions, how people behave, are the source of all actions we can take to counter the problems of disasters and all these natural phenomena in the context of climate change, or not, by the way. So I think that that's put governance somehow at the core of these questions, and it's very important. We can define it, as I said, as soft technology. It's the human dimensions of things. We have to think very broadly about it. It's all the rules, regulations, but also the organizations, the people, the communities that are involved in these decision-making processes or the actions taken. And I like to call that both the players of the game and the rules of the game. That is what is governance. Of course, it's difficult to call disaster management a game, but that's how we could define that: players and rules of the game, all the human dimensions together.
To relate with the climate change, what do you think the main traits of the good governance towards sound DRRM should be?
That's a very important point. I think that good governance has its rules now. We know by experience that whichever the context, whatever the problems we face, good governance is always about accountability, adaptability, transparency, enforcement of the regulations that are accepted by all. Capacity development is also very important. And yet, I think that because of these some new challenges we are facing with climate change, with uncertainty and the difficulties to foresee what is going to happen, we need to add some more dimensions of this good governance. Especially I think about the link with research, because we need intelligence, we need to seek for new data always, we need to model, we need to foresee, to try to see at best what is going to come to us. So I think this what makes governance with some additional traits for facing this DRRM. Yes.
Well, in addition to that, public social participation could form an essential part of DRRM under the climate change context. What is it exactly, and why is it that's so important?
That's a very important point as well. Participation we talk about everywhere. It's sort of become a buzzword, and everybody pretends there's participation here and there, etc. I think we have to be very clear about what is really participation and why it is important in the context of these climate change and all the related disasters. Participation is the fact that people, basic citizens, organizations, individuals can contribute something in the debate, and this contribution can take different forms. I think we can really, all of us, benefit from social or public participation, as this is called, in three aspects. First, governments have plans. They try to do their best to counter, to foresee what's going to happen. Feedbacks from communities is important. We could call that ex ante participation. Before we implement anything, let's have a feedback from communities. They know what they talk about. They have been faced with these disasters sometimes already, and they might have experience to see or to help us adjust the plan that we have in mind. Second, I think that there's a lot of experience on site. People have, as I said, faced these problems before. Even before we plan anything or we try to implement anything, getting information even before we plan, that is also very important. That is the second dimension here is important, to talk to people, to have their voice even before we start to implement or plan anything. And third, I think there's a very important dimension is the one of social capital. I think locally many organizations do exist. It can be very informal, very community-based, and yet these people are used to work together to face those issues, those natural disasters and problems. And learning from these local experience can help other communities, and we can learn as decision makers, as planners, to deal with those disasters much better if we use this public participation. So in a word, I would say, let's forget about this buzzword or gimmick participation everywhere. It has a meaning, and it has different ways of being implemented and used. And I think there are many benefits that are not tapped yet in terms of really implementing participation. It doesn't come as easily as that. It's something people don't participate just like this. It has to be nurtured, fostered by public authorities to prepare for public individuals, communities to participate meaningfully, fruitfully to face these disasters.
Thank you for that. Let me change a little bit context here, particularly in relation to the uncertainty of the informations. We all know that all disasters are not really caused by climate change.
Of course.
Some are just natural phenomena. Given that there is still considerable uncertainty associated with output of all these climate models, etc., what do you think how our governments should approach to ensure a balance between being practical and at the same time being cautious?
Well, first, maybe it's important to remind ourselves that there are two main models for facing risk and uncertainty in terms of policy making. There's on one side a very liberal sort of stance. Let's say US represents very well this stance, but it's taken by many governments around the planet. It's about, okay, not so much regulations, but at the end of the day, if there's any culprit, if someone is spotted as being responsible for a disaster or problem, then people can claim, people will get to court or develop some cases against that. And the basis of that system is that people have to get insured, because uncertainty is there and risks are there, and there is not so much regulation to prevent those things to happen. The other model, big model that exists, is the one more from a European perspective, which is we regulate quite a lot. There are lots of protection mechanisms, but at the end of the day there are some blanket protection to citizens. People don't have to get compulsory insured by themselves. They don't have to go to court or to claim. The system is protecting them because there are rules very much upstream. We call that the principle of precaution, and that's very strong in the European policies in many countries. Well, all of these two systems have pros and cons, can be accepted, and it depends. To me, the key problem is they both rely on what we call representative democracy, meaning people elect other people to represent themselves and talk for themselves. Fine, we call that democracy or representative democracy. The problem with that, faced with climate change, is that policymakers, decision makers, somehow are not meant to stay long in position. They stay for 5, 4, 6 years, etc., sometimes a bit more. The problem is that climate change doesn't wait for that. Climate change is now somehow for a very long time. So we need other forms of governance, other forms of higher level of governments, like IPCC plays a role, the United Nations system as a whole plays this role to be more permanent and to try to bring something more. And again comes the idea of participation. Participation cannot be limited to people voting at times for some people supposed to represent them. There must be what we call deliberative democracy, meaning that inside society people must be free and able and capable to discuss, to debate, to raise ideas and say, hey, we have experience on this, we have experience on that, and we can bring ideas to policymakers to develop good plans for disaster risk reduction management. I think that is the key. So whichever government we have, we know that in the planet we have many representative democracy or not. Some governments are they not really being elected or not. That is not really the point. The point is how inside the society there are mechanisms and room for people to express themselves and to develop this knowledge development, knowledge capacity among the people, the communities, individuals and organizations. And I insist, there are already very interesting organizations existing on the ground. Farmers' communities, villages, women's group, they know what they talk about when it's about disaster management, and they can really help as long as we listen to them and give them an expression and voice. That is important.
Yeah, that's interesting. You use this word like woman group. I was about to ask that in relation to other aspects of the enabling environment for DRRM, how does this gender roles comes into play?
Well, I think we have to be realistic on the daily life, on the ground. Women are in charge of many daily issues, household issues. We like it or not, but that's the sort of bias that exists everywhere in many societies in Asia and elsewhere. It's like that. Women are in charge of the daily businesses. That makes them having a specific position in terms of disaster management, because they know they have been faced with floods on a very concrete basis. They have been faced with these households being damaged or destroyed or problems like this. And their voice is not always heard in these communities or social-cultural settings or religious settings. And the whole point, we need to try to create the conditions, the places, the times where these women can express themselves. We can learn from these women how to deal better with these. But at the same time, I don't want to make women just the suppliers of information. I think bringing them to power and giving them the right capacity also to be in charge of dealing with these plans and any measures we want to put in place is also a very key important dimension. So I think that gender, we can use women as suppliers of information, but it would be a bit unfair. And I think that it's also about the whole equity system of our societies. I think that is at stake here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sylvain R.
Thanks very much.
It has been a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure.
And sharing your insights. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.